pleasure to welcome you to the museum to tonight's event. We've got kind of a lot of exciting things happening today. This is part of our collaboration with Los Angeles Filmforum, and these events happen the second Thursday of every other month, so the odd numbered months. So we definitely want to treat you to attend our next one, which is March 13th. That will kick off a number of different programs around the exhibition Mike Kelly, which is coming to MOCA Gavin Contemporary on March 31st. But the screening that we'll have here will be in this auditorium March 13th, and it's titled Performance Anxiety. I invite you to, when you go back up to the lobby, pick up a calendar if you haven't already that shows all our upcoming programs for the next few months. After tonight's screening, we will have the cafe, Lemonade Cafe right outside, open until 10 p.m. So the museum will be closed, but you can still stick around, hang out, perhaps purchase a book, and talk, enjoy some beverages. They're going to have hot food, and they're going to have some beverages at Lemonade. One more bit of housekeeping is just if you've brought a cell phone with you, that I ask that you just turn it to an inaudible setting. And then our event this evening was programmed by Allison Kosberg, who is on the board of the Los Angeles Film Forum. Please join me in welcoming her to the podium.
Hi everyone. I want to begin tonight by thanking both Catherine and Madison Brookshire. Their tireless work has made this running series possible. I would also like to briefly mention that this Sunday, Film Forum will be hosting a screening of Far From Vietnam at the Egyptian at 7:30 p.m. And that later this month, we will have area premieres of films by Bridget McCaffrey and Lynn Sachs. This Saturday, William E. Jones, whose work you'll see tonight, has an opening at the David Kordansky Gallery. And released in conjunction with that exhibition is this book, Flesh and the Cosmos, which he will be signing outside immediately following tonight's show. In addition to attesting to the moving image's important contributions to contemporary art, Filmforum at MOCA seeks to pressure and elaborate upon the museum's gallery exhibitions. Tonight's program, The General Secretary is Trapped in a Snow Globe, William E. Jones on Peter Roehr, occurs concurrently with MOCA's exhibition Bob Miser and Tom of Finland, currently on display at the Pacific Design Center, and extends the exhibition's consideration of the archival and erotic function of popular and commercial imagery. William E. Jones, whose body of work includes movies, prints, and book projects, is perhaps most well known for his retrieval of lost and concealed histories, particularly of marginal queer figures. These historical excavations, including Halstead Place himself and the fall of communism as seen in gay pornography, are depictions of both labor and desire, capturing pornography as both a record of places and communities and as a purveyor of sexual fantasy. Taken together, the pieces in tonight's program, which include Peter Roehr's sound montages, which you just heard as you came in, Peter Roehr's film montages, William E. Jones's film montages for Peter Roehr, an epistolary lecture, and circuitous program notes that encourage the reader to dip out of the text into a series of embedded footnotes, are both an act of outstanding and well-researched historical authorship and a radical and ethical rejection of linear structure, narrative progress, and a reliance on so-called legitimate source material. Peter Roehr, like previous subjects of Jones's investigations, including Fred Halstead and Alan Lambert, died an untimely death without achieving mainstream accolades or producing a stable of archival materials. Jones's project explores and formally renders these gaps in the record, duly critiquing the systematic erasures enacted by history and modeling a historical method that embraces instead of rejects fantasy, speculation, digression, and detail. Such histories are freed from the obligations of progress and productivity. They do not need to romanticize the past or justify the present. They are neither stable nor closed to intervention. Jones has described his efforts as questioning the archive through the retrieval of the marginal, the rejected, the total trash, or things never intended to reach the public's view. Roehr and Jones's loops take seemingly disposable advertisements and pornography as their source material, offering brief glimpses of the aesthetics of 60s commerce and 70s and 80s sex culture, technology, and urban space. However, the General Secretary's Trapped in the Snow Globe also interrogates the archive by reopening the allegedly concluded narrative of Peter Rohr's life, by imagining other works he might have made, and by facilitating contact and collaboration between him and Jones. Jones observed that the repetitive audio tracks in Rohr's relentlessly looping advertisements threatened to derange the senses of listeners, making manifest a certain sadism latent in the modernist enterprise. Punctuated by hard edits, both Rohr's loops and Jones's film montages force the viewer to reconsider the same instant over and over again, an act that both invites heightened scrutiny of the shape and form of their source material and strips this material of its original function. Thwarting narrative progress, the loops block both the advertisement's commercial viability and pornography's money shot. In making sadism manifest, such works simultaneously reveal and deny the ways we are disciplined as consumers and spectators. Yet, by doing so, they also demonstrate the pleasures of confusing and contorting the modernist enterprise, of making its disciplinary tactics visible and of refusing their intended outcome. Accordingly, it is my tremendous pleasure to introduce William E. Jones to you tonight.
Okay, well, what follows is a work of fiction, more or less. London, March 15th, 2013. Dear Pedro, I recently imagined a letter you wrote to your boyfriend, Paul Maines. I've been trying to figure out why you have such a hold on my imagination, and in an effort to establish something concrete, I've been doing historical research. In the process, I discovered that I made a mistake in the first text I published about you. I mentioned that I had seen your work in 1989 at the Lannan Foundation in Los Angeles, but the foundation maintained its gallery space in Marina del Rey between 1990 and 1997, so this is impossible. The exhibition in which I first saw your film montages was Photography in Contemporary German Art, 1960 to the present being 20 years ago, 1993. A difference of 4 years may not be very important in my personal history, but for you and Charlotte Poznanska, practically your only friend among fellow artists, such a brief period of time was crucial. In 5 years, the entire span of your adult life, you made all of your mature works, then you died of cancer, and Charlotte gave up art making before either of you saw the recognition you deserved. The context in which you would have been best understood did not exist until a few years later, when New York minimalism arrived in West Germany. The Germans' love affair with Donald Judd et al., like their tendency to visit Death Valley in the summer, has been a source of amusement to some Americans. It has made other Americans very rich. I first saw your films on a monitor in a gallery, and I'm not even sure I saw all of them. I had no desire to stand around wearing headphones for 25 minutes. Does anyone? The curators must have wanted the films to be immediately available to spectators, along with the other works in the exhibition, even if they suffered by being presented that way. I thought it was an insensitive and condescending solution to the problem of how to present films in an art context. But what counted most was taking up a bit of room in the gallery as a way of asserting the work's legitimacy. I can't say that matters have improved very much in the last 20 years, perhaps because the fundamental truth has not changed. Whoever takes up the most space wins. Museums and other art institutions tell us they are a great variety of things, but they neglect to mention what all of them have in common: they are real estate. I'm not sure what you can tell about people from the magazines they have in their bathrooms, but I'll reveal that I have art and auction in mine. My upstairs neighbor has the New Yorker. In the New Yorker, I recently read Apologia for Presidents Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. the men who governed the US during the strangely euphoric period leading up to the Great Depression, capitalism's greatest crisis thus far. Perhaps only an American biographer could have gotten away with outlandish praise for Calvin Coolidge's fanatical budget cutting at the very same moment when austerity measures provoked massive protests in the Eurozone. Art and Auction tells us that the market for old masters is going a bit soft, as collectors of a new generation prefer to invest in contemporary art. An ever-expanding group of people look to trends with a vague air of desperation. They don't want to miss out on the next wave that will make their fortune. The richer, smarter, or more established search for a place to stash capital in a form that pleases them. A few brave souls are merely buying what they enjoy without a care. Although I am thoroughly implicated in these developments, I view them with some unease. Partly to immunize myself from their excesses, I have cultivated certain enthusiasms. Public archives, which contain images available for free to anyone. Literary texts in the public domain, many of them from the classical past. And socialist realism, the style of art likely to be the last one assimilated into the market. This turning away from an atmosphere of irrational exuberance also led me to embrace you and Charlotte. The two of you, and many others whom I hold in esteem, are foreign to the discourse of the marketplace as ultimate arbiter of worth. You didn't have to make unappetizing decisions for the sake of money and reputation, because neither was a realistic concern at the time. Your idealism remains intact because the dead cannot accumulate personal wealth. You're not an institution, and you are not on your way to becoming one anytime soon. Because of all of these things, you can be a discovery rather than an inevitability. We can still see your work clearly. Fondly, William. P.S. Philo T. Farnsworth, the pioneer of television in the United States, upon seeing a proposal for commercials in the new mass medium, responded indignantly that they were very irritating. The ad man informed him that the best way of reaching a consumer is to present something that sticks in the mind. And in this regard, irritating stimuli are much more effective than pleasurable ones. This anecdote reminds me of you. I wonder if you were aware of it when you made your films. And we'll have a little break for a very short movie, and then I'll continue. That was unintentional. Is it okay to talk now? Okay. Frankfurt am Main, December 20th, 1966. Dear Paul, I won't have you believing the current state of my health has made me succumb to conventional sentiment. My position on Christmas is as contrary as ever, maybe even more so, with my mother decorating the house with all sorts of pseudo-religious kitsch. She knows that I will be moving in with you once you return to Germany. She reckons this is the last holiday she will spend with her son, and she's going all out. You're probably thinking, what a mama's boy. But I can tell you I look forward to escaping her well-meaning attentions as soon as humanly possible. We'll form another sort of household together, and it can't help but be less oppressive than the nuclear family studied by sociologists. And speaking of oppression, how is life in the consciousness industry these days? We both know you weren't cut out for a career in advertising. Young and Rubicam has enabled you to see the world, well, Paris and New York, more than I've ever seen, and provided you with the means to rent a decent apartment for us. Without the firm's unknowing participation, I never would have been able to make all of those works based upon advertising films. Does anyone at the office realize the use to which those liberated Breck shampoo and Gulf oil commercials have been put? The legal department might take an interest in this, but you can tell them from me that the whole endeavor is the best possible publicity, making a claim on posterity for ephemeral garbage that otherwise no one would remember next year or even next month. I suppose they aren't really thinking about posterity any more than the staff of the New York Herald Tribune frets about yesterday's edition. The future is where the action is. Well, as someone whose future is radically limited, I can say I disagree. If anyone takes an interest in my works after my death, I will leave it to you to oversee their circulation in the world. You may also disseminate the statements I've written about my works, but not this letter. It's between us. I've been looking over the statements, and one specifically about the films is troubling because it invites distortion or misinterpretation. What interested me was not the literary content of the scenes. The problem is that my films don't quite fit with the rest of the works. There's much more to them than I've let on. You can't just will the subject matter of photographic images out of existence. Well, you can, and you end up with abstract photography, which is banal in the worst possible way. But what is a good way of embracing banality? From an aesthetic point of view, I've opened Pandora's box. I should clarify my position at some point. If only I weren't so busy making these hundreds of works that no one wants. No matter what happens, German art critics with their absurd literal-mindedness will undoubtedly take my statements at face value. I can't really blame the knowledge merchants for repressing details that stand in the way of a totalizing interpretation, or whatever the current philosophical fashion is. That reminds me, could you pick up a copy of Against Interpretation to bring back with you? I know you have a lot of things to pack, but the bookstores here are hopeless, even more so than the art galleries when it comes to fathoming what is going on in New York. How I wish I were there. Whenever I have news from you, I feel like the poor bumpkin from the DDR. My mother left for the West to find greater opportunities, but where did she take us? Not Cologne, but Frankfurt. Did she think she'd make a banker out of me? You'll protest, if this guy hadn't been living in Frankfurt, he never would have gotten that summer job in the mailroom, and we never would have met. It's true, the place has had its compensations. For my part, I'll take credit in rescuing you from the friends whose condescension you suffered because there was no one else on the scene. You were on your way to becoming a bitter old auntie until I came along and shook things up. Does a single one of those piss-elegant queens know who Saul LeWitt is, or even Rauschenberg? Did you when I met you? They assume I am your protege being guided into a career of sterile snobbery by his elder. You have shown me a few tricks, and I will be forever grateful that you showed an interest when no one else would. But the idea that I am your creation, just because I was only 19 when we met, is completely preposterous. By the way, I've reflected on it, and I've come to the conclusion that your idea of opening a gallery in Germany is sound. I now know, I know you only mentioned it in an offhand way, but I think that's because you have ambition that you may not be able to acknowledge even to yourself. The type of art you have seen in New York is not a passing fashion. I suspect it will conquer the benighted Federal Republic eventually. The mention of ambition would fill dear Charlotte with righteous anger, I'm sure. She quite correctly decries art's professionalization, to use a word fit for a sociologist. Since you have been gone, she talks more and more about quitting art altogether. At first I was annoyed, but I've come to see the logic of her position. When there's no money or no fame at stake, you can devise any number of solutions to the problem of art in total freedom. Unfortunately, even the most economical art requires a bit of money to produce. And when there is almost nowhere to show it and no critical response, you begin to wonder, what's the point? Are my artistic ambitions as ridiculous as my mother would have me believe? Charlotte sees the whole endeavor as irredeemably compromised as soon as money changes hands. She's managed to remove herself from the fray by selling her works for the cost of production. I believe I'm representing her ideas correctly, but I must say that sometimes I have trouble determining where my thoughts end and hers begin. The aspect of her position I cannot quite grasp relates to art's social usefulness. Charlotte wants to change the world, if only in a small way. Modular works constructed of poor materials and installed however a site will accommodate them can be accessible to a popular audience. A proletarian district can have its own Charlotte Poznanska sculpture, and when the residents are tired of looking at it, the whole thing can be disassembled and put away or installed elsewhere. At least that's the theory. I personally suspect that idealized realistic painting, not far from the canon upheld by the National Socialists, would please the audience more. And if you do manage to educate the masses so they can accept advanced art, what then? Does it really make their lives better? Charlotte is absolutely committed to the task of improving the lot of the poor and downtrodden. She realizes art does little to further this cause, so she has decided to pursue direct social action. She is still pondering exactly what to do. The only thing she knows with certainty is that it isn't art. And all this is happening inside of her. A conviction is forming at the very moment when the world is beginning to pay attention to her work. Charlotte and I were marked by history in different ways. She was an infant when Hitler came to power, and as a girl and bastard child, she was treated as a second-class citizen at school. I was an infant when it all came crashing down. I suppose the difference in our ages accounts for how our political convictions converge, or diverge. I'm entirely in sympathy with her art, but I remain skeptical of its power to affect consciousness. If I had stayed in the East and practiced art, I would have been subject to the recommendations of the Bitterfeld Conference, which, quote, drew workers and peasants into the process of artistic creativity, unquote. This description from a Soviet encyclopedia. Workers became artists, artists represented workers, and the policy was all very sound, at least in principle. In practice, it resulted in one aesthetic nullity after another, and this was obvious from a cursory glance at the paintings on display in official exhibitions. It seemed that everyone was aware of the failure of the Bitterfeld way except the boss, Walter Ulbricht, General Secretary of the Socialist Unity Party. The man really had no sense of aesthetics at all in his appreciation of culture or in his personal appearance. He appeared in public wearing ill-fitting suits, each one more hideous than the last. When I saw him in movies, I would wonder if the voluminous folds and unkempt collars were hiding some physical deformity. Perhaps there was a hunchback to go with the great bald head and shrill speaking voice. He looked like a garden gnome, and unlike truly great leaders, he provided those under his authority with no masturbatory fantasies at all. Ulbricht exerted a different fascination over me. I saw a documentary called Builder of Socialism when I was 9 or 10 years old. One scene showed his exile in the Soviet Union. The producers of the film placed him at the Battle of Stalingrad. They found a possibly authentic still photograph of Ulbricht and two soldiers in a snowdrift, then animated it with a zoom into his face and superimposed an effect of falling snow. The sequence consisted of a map of Stalingrad, a shot of the battlefield in the blizzard, this animated shot, and then a return to the battlefield. The trick was unconvincing to me even as a child, but I loved it. I imagined that in the midst of the decisive battle of the Second World War, Walter Ulbricht had gotten himself trapped inside a snow globe. I obsessively thought of these shots playing over and over again to my intense amusement. I wanted my mother to take me to see Builder of Socialism again, but she refused. She knew nothing about my fantasy life, and she must have been dismayed by what she took to be my patriotic feelings for a country she was preparing to leave. The film was released on June 17, 1953, during the biggest popular uprising in the DDR's history. I wonder if anyone crossed the path of a Soviet tank to attend the premiere. The events inspired Bertolt Brecht's poem, The Solution, written for the desk drawer and celebrated posthumously. After the uprising of the 17th of June, the Secretary of the Writers' Union had leaflets distributed in the Stalinallee stating that the people had forfeited the confidence of the government and could win it back only by redoubled efforts. Would it not be easier in that case for the government to dissolve the people and elect another? All this started to come back to me when you took me to see Citizen Kane. There's a snow globe in the first scene, isn't there? Walter Ulbricht and Charles Foster Kane, the hardline communist and the rapacious capitalist, two grotesque father figures united in my mind because of their association with a child's toy. Well, that lends itself to a nice, neat psychological explanation for the origins of my art, cheap symbolism and good visuals as in a Hollywood movie, or better yet, seductive advertising. Perhaps you can use this for one of your campaigns back in New York. I can't say I'm overjoyed to be living in a colony of the USA in the shadow of its largest European military base. Armed Forces Radio comes in loud and clear. But where else am I to live? On the moon? In Leipzig, I would have had to deal with the cultural bureaucrats. In Frankfurt, we deal with the demands of the market. I appropriate its noise and cant and detritus, and I represent it in all its numbing brutality. I've rejected my education in art, yet I am a product of it at the same time. I have little sense of craftsmanship aside from what a commercial artist would employ. Perhaps my apprenticeship as a sign painter really did prove useful after all. Do you remember poor old Schmela telling me at his gallery that my montages were promising and that he looked forward to further developments? What developments? I had one idea, the strict repetition of mechanically reproduced elements, there is nothing to develop. I'm considering leaving the field at the moment of my choosing, as Charlotte will. She has more strength of character than I, but then I don't really need it, because the treachery of my body will make reversing this final decision impossible. In the meantime, I will repeat myself until I'm done with repetition. At the point when I believe I have systematized my art in a way that is decisive and consistent and above reproach, the whole enterprise threatens to slip out of my control. The films continue to trouble me. I wonder if I should suppress them, even though they are a logical development from my sound montages. The truck plunging over and over into water, and the wrestlers throwing themselves around 10 times seem to indicate another path to take. I've applied the principles of sound poetry to the constituent elements of film narrative. What are the consequences of this? I'm curious, but I must accept that I will probably never find out. Dear Paul, I'm happy that I found you, my friend and my audience. I thought of you while I was watching a B-movie on television recently. One of the characters said to another, "All this, my darling, will one day be yours." It's a line I can repeat to you if you are willing to accept my body of work, a gift that you never expected, but one that you deserve. Destroy this letter if you want, or read it and put it away. What you do with it hardly matters. What matters is my writing it. With all love and respect, Peter. And now for Peter's movies.